So I've been to a lot of your shows. I don't know how many, several, many, mostly here in Boulder, Denver, Fort Collins. And, you know, I think I probably got into using different substances around 2010. I went to Bonnaroo for the first time. And slowly got more and more different experiences with different music, being exposed to different musics and musicians. And yeah, I find personally that I like certain musics when I have experiences with different medicines. And I was wondering, you know, if you make music with that in mind, knowing that your crowd is going to do LSD maybe, or MDMA or DMT or something like that, does that in any way influence how you make your music?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say that the answer is, well, I don't necessarily do it for that purpose, but having had profound experiences with psychedelics and music in the past myself, there's no way I can close that door. And so music to me is a form of a psychedelic experience. And the one of the things I'd like to do with my music is to be able to create, I guess, a psychedelic experience without the use of substances, and because it all goes to the same place in our brain in a way, and in our consciousness. And so it is not necessarily, I mean, there are times where I'll have a thought, I'm like, wow, if you're tripping right now, this sound is going to really get you, you know, or whatever. But for the most part, I would say I'm more interested in just creating music that's beautiful and can create a journey in your mind with or without those substances. And if that's what you want to do and that's how you want to enjoy the music, then that's really up to the listener. Yeah. And I've heard stories from people about different experiences they've had with it, and it's just so cool because I don't know what's going on in people's brains. I don't even understand how music even really works on a fundamental level, you know, how it affects, you know, so it's all part of it. And nor do I really understand how psychedelics work on a fundamental level. Therefore, I'm just throwing a bunch of stuff into this mystery bag of emotion and thought, and then hoping that something good comes out of it.
Yeah. I have kind of made the analogy that of so many experiences I've had with your music have felt like just rocking and holding, and kind of what comes to mind is like being in the womb. And I was at least one show of yours where you had these kind of like pregnant mannequins. Is there some like awareness of that, or is there an intention behind that, like where it's very specifically supposed to be related to kind of being in the womb?
I have developed my own philosophy around, well, for one, I do have a kid, so I do have a special relationship. I mean, we've all been in the womb when we were kids, obviously, but having had my own kid and experiencing that whole process, and that's when the pregnant mannequins kind of came into my world, which honestly, some people got it and some people didn't, you know. But I do kind of have this philosophy around music where if you were to imagine like the shape of a diamond, and at the top is the source, and that is the womb, and that is the where everything comes from, and then it divides into masculine and feminine kind of energies, and so you have like very feminine music and very like masculine music, like heavy metal or whatever, and then there's like a reunification of those two worlds, which is more kind of like jazz or something, which is kind of asexual and more of an intellectual kind of experience. So I like to think about my music sometimes falling somewhere on that spectrum of either masculine, feminine, intellectual, or source, I guess is the best, or womb. And I often gravitate towards that point of trying to get to that source, that feeling of being in the womb, and that feeling of the beginning and the end of all existence and all time and all feeling. So that's sort of where I came sort of hone in on that concept of the womb and with those mannequins and really try and express that feeling of what I imagine it's like to be in the womb through the music.
Well, I think that, at least from my experience, this seems pretty accurate. I mean, if that's the kind of impact that I'm feeling, that my husband Lauren is feeling, and other people I've talked to, my friends, my relatives, other people that listen to your music, it's really, it feels really organic and warm, and like I said, holding, which is really great because, so as you know, I just have 2 babies, and I've heard before that people say, like, if you play a song every time, like if you do a lot of repetition with a song, that the baby will come to recognize it, and it can be very soothing and comforting. Well, so I kind of, I don't know about really the brain or music either. Like, I don't really know exactly how babies' brains are forming or what's going on there. And so I decided in my mind, well, it doesn't have to be like a nursery rhyme. So I started playing your music and like Ayla Nerio and Tipper and just like songs that I find soothing, Ott and like other things like that. And I'm wondering how that is impacting them. And when you had your kid, did you play music like that, or did you play your own music? Did you do a lot of that, and what was that experience like?
So there was a couple. Well, for my son, we kind of, he was kind of one of those highly amped, very emotional, like, really happy or really upset. And like, so we often were looking for ways to, calm him down, especially on car rides when they're like kind of strapped in the back. And that's like when they're like, somebody pick me up and hold me. And so, for some reason, Radiohead was like like In Rainbows, and it was like the thing for, just stumbled across it as being the one that really calmed him down. And my own music, which I was working on some albums and stuff, and actually wrote him some songs. And then I did find that my, and I wanted him to know my music kind of from the beginning of his life. I wanted him to be super familiar with it, because at some point I'd like to basically hand off the business to him and have him carry on, whatever. But so yeah, I did end up kind of being soothing for him. Certain songs more than others, but I let him decide on what the songs were that calmed him down, So yeah, there's something there. And once again, I think it's awesome because babies are just, there's no context for them, of what the music is or who this person is, or whether it's Tipper or Ayla or myself, or there's nothing there. And so it's just the pure frequency. And it's really amazing to see how certain songs affect kids the same way they affect adults, without any context. You can still just experience the music for what it is. Yeah. And that part has always really fascinated me.
Yeah. Do you believe that, on that topic of just experiencing the pure frequency, do you believe that everything is kind of neutral initially, and that it's, for instance, like, the sound of a guitar or a piano versus the sound of like a gunshot? Do you think that is just neutral stimulus, and then later when we have the context, we then know how to interpret it?
No, I think that all of our ancestors that weren't creeped out by weird sounds in the forest are dead now, because they were killed by some saber-toothed tiger or something. Yeah, that makes sense. And every sound has an effect on us that is deeply primal. And yes, there are things that we learn in life to associate, like the sound of like a car. Maybe instinctually that's not something that would have frightened us if we're like walking out. But if you're walking to the middle of the street and you hear a car zooming, that's gonna, now that is a bad sound. Get out of the way. So you do learn things, but there are certain things that are deeply ingrained in our psyche from the very moment we're born that that are actually very important, I think, to understand if you are a composer, to be able to use those sounds effectively. The sounds of dissonance, the sounds of of like a roaring of an animal, like kind of sounds. Like those things create sort of tension in us. And there's other sounds that are more like the sound of your mother cooing you to sleep at night. And by using those different sounds, you can actually create an emotional space for people that is deeply primal, and then use other tools that you are more learned in life, and like such as lyrics or things that like without you definitely have to have context in order to be able to understand. So I think this is like really trying to find, I like to think of it as like really balancing. When I'm creating music, it's equal parts creativity and science. There's something there that's like, there's a technical thing that you need to master in order to, or understand what it is that you're even doing. The basic stuff that other people have generations before us have learned about, harmony and whatnot, and use those tools and think of it as a scientific principle. And then the other half is just your pure heart and soul and creativity, and without any thought about what that even means. There are no rules, and they're meant to be broken. But I think that there is something there that's inside of us that is really fascinating to try and understand, and how to use music to effectively hit those parts in our brain to create different emotional spaces.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I don't know. I had a therapist once, a Buddhist therapist, who said something like that. All stimulus is neutral, and I don't know that he really was meaning it like kind of the way that I was conceptualizing it. Okay, so on the topic of your son, how old is he now?
He's 8.
He's 8. Does he play music?
He's definitely a performer. He loves to like write songs on the fly, and can just you give him a topic and he can just make an entire composition up. It's pretty incredible.
That's really cute.
I would say, and he's very interested in he likes Marshmello, the EDM. We took him to the Marshmello Red Rocks concert and stuff like that. He likes like the really high energy electronic music, and he loves festivals, and I don't want to force him into doing anything that he doesn't want to do, and but I do really see in him a pretty innate ability to be a performer, and he's got this really magnetic kind of big personality. I think it's going to work well for him if he decides to perform someday.
And you're kind of hoping he does?
This lifestyle is not for everyone. And if you're not mentally and emotionally in a good place within yourself, it can actually destroy you. I've watched it happen with people, because you're putting yourself out there. And if you can't handle rejection, or because there's it's a lot of high highs and a lot of low lows, and it's not for everyone. And if you can't ride those waves, then it can tear you apart. And that's why there's so many, you look around at like some of the most successful artists of our lifetimes, like Kurt Cobain or something, or they blow their head off, it's like, here's something that everybody's like, oh, he's the greatest, but then how happy is he? And that's the kind of thing that I think that you really have to look in the mirror and say, is this for me? Do I have the constitution to even have this kind of career? A lot of people don't really see the lows, because you're a performer, and so you have to perform. And and you also, it's not really, it seems so petty to complain about some of the things that come up, because you can have 100 people say that was the best show ever, and then one person's like, I hate you, that sucked, and that's all you're going to think about all night, unless you can really like focus on like trying to overcome those. And it doesn't make any sense. Like why don't it's not, but it's not something that you can really explain. It's just our human nature. And depending on who you are, those little lows are gonna hurt more, maybe, or less, depends. So going back to, that's why it'd be great to see him perform. It'd be awesome. But I'm not gonna force him or expect that of him, or even really encourage him to do it if I don't think that it's really something that he wants to do. But he's expressed a lot of interest in wanting to do it, so I'm gonna help facilitate that as much as I can. That
sounds like a really beautiful approach to take, and really gentle. And I think really appropriate and what more kids need, because so many kids are things are pushed on them.
Yeah.
You need to play football or go to college or whatever. And I think we all have had some experiences of that probably. Do you find for yourself that this type of lifestyle is relatively sustainable? Or does it kind of, if you were sort of on a spectrum of sustainability, where do you find yourself?
That's an interesting question, because I think I do look around at some of my peers who have really gone to the next level of I guess, financial security with their music careers.
Yeah.
I am still at the place where I'm doing well, but if I were to just stop playing shows today for whatever reason, then I wouldn't really have anything to fall back on. So is it sustainable? It is right now, while I have my health and while I have my fans and I have the road, But having a music career can be quite challenging, because there was a time when selling records could keep your career alive, and you would just play shows to promote your album sales. And now it's the complete opposite. Now album sales are to promote your shows, because that's where you make all your money. So is it sustainable? I hope so. It's been fun. It's been going great. It's actually getting better, every day. But there is a sort of, it's like anything really, it's the kind of career where you have to just be willing to be in the moment with it and not get too stuck on where you're going to be in 10 years and hope that it's all going to work out, I guess.
I mean, and then in terms of also kind of like what you're saying, like emotionally or mentally, like, would you find that it's relatively sustainable for you in that way? There has
been times where it has been very bad for me emotionally and very self-destructive. And I had made some poor choices on my own mental and emotional health with how I handled my career. I've been doing this for a while now, and I feel like now I'm at a place where it does feel like wholesome, I guess is the best way. I've finally gotten to that place where it's not about just partying and going crazy every night and, looking for an egoic, having too many egoic needs going into it and expectations. I've learned to let go of a lot of my expectations because that's how you get disappointed. Also, as you know, I'm touring with Michelle, who's my girlfriend, and she's now my tour manager and helps me sell merch on the road. And so she's with me every day now. And so that really has changed it in a way that I never knew was even possible to actually have. Now, in a way, home is on the road, whereas before it was always missing. I mean, I still miss my kid on the road, and that's been difficult. But at least to have my partner with me has made things a hell of a lot easier and better, so, and I find just healthier, more emotionally together.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it being really lonely.
Yeah, I can get lonely sometimes.
I mean, even when you have all these fans and these people around you, sometimes being around people is the loneliest.
Oh, it can be terrifyingly lonely. Yeah. You show up in a festival like in Philadelphia or something, I don't know anybody, and then they take you straight to your hotel. They pick you up an hour before your set. You go straight to your set, you play. An hour later, you're back at the hotel watching Forensic Files by yourself, going, what is the fucking point of that? And then you do that a couple days in a row, and then you're flying and traveling, and it's just you and your headphones. I've listened to all my podcasts, and and that's when it gets that's where you can really sink down low within yourself. And
that makes sense.
So you have to be careful with that and careful with yourself.
Yeah. I always wondered about that. I always wondered about the different people that I listen to and being like, man, I wish that we could just be friends. I wish that we could have, when I'm at a Rise, I want to see Random Rab. I want to hang out with him. I want him to come back to my, tent and smoke a joint or whatever. Do you ever do anything like that? Do you ever hang out with your fans?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, all the time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that part of it, actually. And everybody's so cool. I love my fans, and they're some of the nicest and most just amazing, creative, and intelligent people I've ever met. And really, that is the best part about performing, honestly.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like I was talking about the whole, like, where it gets hard is when you're actually, you're like at the airport, when you're at the thing, you're doing everything but hanging out with your fans. Right. That's when it gets difficult, is when you're just by yourself,
Yeah.
But when I'm actually with my fans at the shows, it's like family.
Yeah.
And I find that one of the coolest parts about doing this is that because I'm communicating through my music who I am as a person, then anybody who appreciates my music knows a little piece of me. And so we're already friends. And so I know if they know that part of me and they appreciate it, then I can appreciate that part of them too. And so we're friends. And so in a way, calling them my fans seems like to lessen the actual relationship, which is like my family, my friends.
Yeah.
And I've made friends, and maybe I won't hang out with them ever again. I'll just be like 20 minutes or whatever, but it's just great. And I just let go of the idea that I need to like establish this year-long relationship to call somebody a friend. And these are my friends. Yeah,
that makes sense. And especially, I mean, when I think of all the different intimate parts of my life that music comes into, when I was in labor, I had a playlist of music that I was listening to. When I'm in the shower, when I'm making love, or whatever, all these different times. I mean, or it could be I'm cleaning the house, but it is so much these different intimate times where it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't really make sense to have you kind of an arm's length of, well, he's this musician and I'm just a fan. It's like, if you found your way into my life in that way, then I suppose it would be like more like a friendship.
Yeah. Well, it's a very reciprocal relationship, because I go to a show, and if it's just me on stage by myself with an empty room,
right,
it would just suck.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to, I'd rather just be home, But when the crowd's there and everybody's like, God, giving that energy, then it feeds into the music, and it becomes this circle of energy that just like feeds upon itself. And then it's the greatest feeling for me, and, hopefully for everyone too. It's like, so I feel that the relationship is much more necessary and strong than I think a lot of people who are fans of whatever music give themselves credit for. Like they're playing a part in this bigger thing. They're making it possible for this musician to actually even survive as an artist.
Yeah. What is like the coolest experience that you ever had with somebody that you met like at a show randomly?
Oh gosh. I mean,
is there anything that kind of jumps out?
Well, I mean, coolest. I mean, some of the most touching experiences are the ones where people have shared with me that they walked down the aisle to my music, or they gave birth to their kid with my music playing, or they played my music for their father while he was dying, or, I just recently had a guy tell me that he was stabbed in the neck and almost bled out because some dude was tripping out and thought on acid or something, stabbed this guy in the neck, and he went to the hospital, almost died, and then was listening to my music during recovery and wanted to share that with me. And wow. It was just like, holy shit.
God.
So
that's intense.
It is intense, but those moments are of reality. Oftentimes, it has around death or things, those are the ones that can be the most profound and really real and really kind of put things in perspective about where your music may end up, and what an honor it is for someone to be able to share my music with someone close to them as they're passing or something. I think that's probably one of the highest honors you can have. So those stories are the ones too that, I'm sharing a few moments with you now, but I can't get online and be like, last night someone told me this story, a super personal story. So these stories are something that I just keep inside and will, try and they mean so much to me, and just put them in my little safe. And then next time I'm working on music, I try and think of that. If I start to doubt myself or something, I can remember like there's maybe something more than me. It's more important. This to be an artist is important for somebody,
Yeah. I remember one time, I think it was at the Fox Theater, and I was there with Lauren, and I had never heard Apparently. And we had done, I think, a dose of LSD, and we're there and we're off to the side and we're just like, oh, I'm like, oh, this is sweet. And we're holding each other. And then I just started weeping, and I went into his arms and I said into his ear, like, why am I crying? I don't know why I'm sad. And he said, well, it's a sad song. And, you know, it was just kind of like that, like a small opening of, you know, like just touching the deep grief, I guess, that exists in all of us and that exists in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a period after that where every time that song came on, I would have, you know, Spotify or something, some kind of playlist, and that song would come on and I would always cry. And then I remember there was a time when one day I didn't cry, and it felt actually kind of uplifting. And it was so interesting to have those different experiences with that song, you know?
Well, I feel like there's happy and there's sad, which are just emotional states that I'm happy right now, I'm sad right now. But there's joy and sorrow, which are more deep within us. So you can actually be sad, but still be filled with joy, you know, because maybe you're just sad because something bad happened today. But if you really look at yourself, you're like, I'm filled with joy. But joy and sorrow are sort of interconnected, and they're like the line between them is very small, if there even is a line. And I think that through, like what we were describing through music, I love the point to get. My favorite is when there's a song that kind of hits on joy and sorrow simultaneously, and it's not sad or happy. It's something different.
That makes sense. And
I've had that experience on LSD too with music, where I've been just bawling my eyes out. But not because I'm sad. It's just because it's just something. It's a feeling, which is just like the pinnacle of joy and sorrow.
Yeah,
happening simultaneously.
I feel like acid has that kind of way of really creating what's the word I'm looking for? Paradox. Like just, I feel so much joy and sorrow at the same time. So much gratitude and grief. So much, you know, just appreciation for life, and also overwhelm at the impact of all the serious things that are happening on the planet, you know. Somebody asked me, so I stepped down recently as the executive director of the NOAC Society, but I don't know if I had ever mentioned that to you, if you've heard of it before, but me, myself, Nate, Mallory, Lauren, who are all upstairs right now, and a handful of other friends and colleagues, we co-founded this nonprofit organization that is focused on helping people to be more in relationship, fully, healthfully, intentionally in relationship with themselves, with each other, and then with all the drugs and substances that we take in. And that could include, of course, these different illicit substances, but also things like that are prescribed to us, you know, because you have a lot of people abusing a lot of different prescription medicines these days. And how can we actually use it as a medicine? And what is the difference between a medicine and a drug? So we had a fundraiser at Phil Lewis's art gallery.
Okay.
Back in April of this year. And I was pregnant. And there was a gentleman there who asked me if I had come up already with a sort of plan to introduce my girls to drugs, and like what was that going to look like, and how was I going to kind of broach that. And I'm like, they're not even born yet. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, you know, maybe like in 13 or 16 years. I was like, I haven't thought about it. Okay. But you know, from your perspective of having an adolescent, you know, have you had any kind of conversations? I mean, kids ask a lot of questions. So what's that been like for you, that kind of journey so far? Where do you see it going?
He's 8, so he's still at a point young. Where, you know, I don't think that I mean, we've had a few discussions about it. At this point, though, it's still like, you know, anything is off limits at this point.
Right. Absolutely.
But I also want to be completely honest with him. I think, you know, it's an interesting thing because you're dealing with two different things here. We're dealing with like the health benefits or non-benefits of taking these substances, but we're also dealing with law. And so as a parent, that's my biggest concern. Is I'm more, you know, I've told him, it's like, don't die, don't get addicted to drugs, don't go to jail. These are like 3 things that I require of you.
Yeah.
And so, but the don't go to jail part is a big part of it. So it's interesting to think about, you know, that as a parent now about what you know, it's like, you know, really that's a huge thing is like, you know what, you know, you got to be careful with that part of it. But of course, more importantly with your brain. So kids are doing drugs a lot younger than I feel like than when I was a kid. I grew up in Indiana. I didn't even smoke weed until I was outside of high school. So I came from a totally different reality. Yeah. Than, you know, now it's like in Oregon, you know, these kids are like 12, 13 years old trying smoking weed. And that to me is a little young. So but I do want to kind of catch that thought early and really, you know, instill in him the ability to really be able to know when it's the right time for himself and, you know, perhaps be a part of some of the initial experimentation stuff when he's old enough. I think that'd be important, but yeah, that's a tough one. That's one thing I've thought about a lot. I don't really know what the best solution is. And I think every kid's going to be different too. And also their social circles, like what's it? Do they have responsible friends or? Right.
That makes a big difference. I think you're right. You know, when I didn't start doing anything until I was 17. I started smoking pot. And I'm sure my mom knew and she found out and she approached me not in a blaming or shaming way, which I really appreciate. Now in retrospect, she was like, same kind of thing. She was like, listen, if you get busted, if you're cruising with your friends and you go to jail, she's like, I'm not going to bail you out. This is, you know, your responsibility and this is how it can affect you. And if you want to go to college and So I think that is huge. But, you know, for myself, I have felt such healing, releasing. You have a song called Release Me? Is that the title of the song? Release. Okay. So I love that song. And I've definitely had it on before when I was dealing with some kind of, you know, trauma that was coming up. And I feel like probably every time that I do, and, you know, MDMA has much more of a feel of, I know it can be used therapeutically, absolutely, but I'm far more recreational in my use of it. LSD, I think, has a way of starting out recreational and turning therapeutic just automatically. It wants to do that. I'm like, if you're not crying at least once while you're tripping, then it's probably going to happen. So yeah, it's I think I almost feel like it's like you said with people, you know, what are the friends like? What is the situation? How's it? You know, because I have found it so healing, and I would think that it would be healing for a lot of people, but I also don't. I think you have to have a strong ego in order to dissolve the ego. You know.
Yes, you do, and it's not. That's why I think that we really, as a society, as a scene, you know, it's really unfortunate that actually I think that drugs like LSD and or psychedelics rather are not completely legal because the discussion has to be kept so underground about how to use these things helpfully. And it does sometimes really hit me really hard in a bad way when I've been to some of these festivals that are less, I guess, conscious about the drug usage, and all these kids are walking around with ketamine and, you know, everything all at once, and they're really young, and my heart breaks, you know. I would say most festivals and stuff aren't like that, but I have been to some that do have that kind of just like vibe, you know. And that's when I just really wish that our society had a better way of discussing it, about the good, the bad, the ugly, the pretty, the everything. Because right now that conversation is just so forced into this weird underground place where it's really can be hard for people to openly speak about it, or openly ask questions about it, and be shamed by their teachers or wherever. And you can't go to your teacher and be like, well, what, you know, how does this play into this or whatever? And it's just like, you can't do it. So there's something missing in our culture and our society that I really wish was there. I feel like it's getting better, and slowly, day by day, that conversation is getting easier to have. And there's sign. I mean, they're just now looking at putting psilocybin mushrooms, decriminalizing them in Oregon. I mean, it happened for a few years, but the fact that discussion is even happening is incredible. Because everyone knows that for the most part, I mean, taking mushrooms in Oregon is going to probably be good for you. And it's made for it there, you know?
Pretty
so, you know, I hope to see that conversation become easier and better and more, and everybody be more conscious and educated about whatever they put into their bodies.
Yeah, that's absolutely like the mission of our organization. And we've actually, you know, we've had the 501c3 status for about 1.5 years, I think. And a vision that I have is like taking it into schools, you know, kind of like the DEAR program, except for the opposite, like being really honest about, you know, some of these things are really scary. And especially if you're with people that you don't trust, or if you're, obviously, since they're not regulated substances, you know, you can try to buy MDMA and then you end up getting bath salts or, you know, N-bomb or some other kind of research chemical that doesn't have the impact and is, you know, not the proper dosage or whatever. Have you ever really thought about that? Like in terms of where would it be really the most helpful or the most appropriate for it to kind of come into the society?
Well, I mean, I think it'd be amazing if it happened at school, but
I mean,
not going to happen.
I mean, are we talking like 50 years, 100 years from now? Like,
I mean, who knows if our, you know, generations coming up now are going to completely change society in that way. But I feel like there's still people that, you know, like people like Jeff Sessions and all these other government people where it's just like they can't even handle the idea of, you know, they want to put people away for smoking weed, you know, to smoking a joint for 5 years or something. It's just ridiculous. It's absurd. So I think if it can't happen there, it's going to happen elsewhere. And I think that really, you know, things like our festival community is the place to do it. And, you know, when I was at Boom in Portugal, where drugs are basically completely legal there, they had an entire setup of you could bring your drugs and they get your drugs tested, and then not only that, they had warnings like, oh, like we found that there's this type of LSD is actually really bad, don't do it. And they had a sign with a picture of what it looked like and what the symptoms were, and they had some people got in trouble or, you know, physically for taking it. And so it was just this really awesome educational experience. And there were hundreds of people in line with their drugs, not worried about getting arrested, testing them and realizing like, oh, this is crap. And they throw it away. And then they saved another person's life, you know? And that, I want to see more of that. Because you can't just pretend that people aren't doing recreational drugs. They really are. So therefore, it's our responsibility as a society and culture to help people take care of themselves. And to have that cognitive dissonance around this and kind of this like turn a blind eye to it, the only solution is to put people in jail, which is the most ridiculous thing. We have more people incarcerated in this country than there were slaves back in the, you know, and it's often used for the wrong reason. And there's a lot of all this racism, and it's just the way that we treat drugs in this country is just, I mean, it's terrifying. So I just hope that we can find a solution. And I believe that our festival scene, our this thing that we're all a part of, that you're a part of, that I'm a part of, that Alex Gray and Android Jones and all the, you know, like this pan visionary thing that is going on. This is the scene that's going to really this is where we have to do the work. And I really think that Colorado is you know, leading, is the forefront of that. And
I would absolutely agree. I'm actually also from Indiana.
Oh, really? Yeah. Where are you from again?
Valparaiso. Yeah, I grew up in Valpo, and then I went to school down at Purdue in Lafayette, West Lafayette. But it's like Indiana is one of, I think, 4 remaining states that still doesn't even have medical marijuana. And it's ridiculous because, for instance, like my mom is somebody who could really benefit from that, and she's a school bus driver. So it's like, okay, well, if she ever got busted smoking pot, it would be like such a thing, you know what I mean? But it's also like she has these medical issues where then she's prescribed these other medicines that I would think are far more severe than cannabis, and it's just like, it doesn't make any sense. I keep trying to tell her to come out here and drive the bus to show party buses.
Well, I remember back, growing up in Indiana, it was like, you know, you go to jail for 4 years for having a joint, you know, or whatever, or longer even. And they, like you said, their main, you know, if you have anxiety, they give you Xanax or something. I mean, it's just like, to me, I consider Xanax like one of the most hardcore drugs that you can. I hate the stuff. Like it's just like it's like heroin or something. Like you just don't do it, and then they just like throw it out like Pez. You know, I really can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, I don't like to conceptualize drugs as good and bad in terms of like the kind of moralistically good, but I like to frame it as like helpful and harmful. Right. So I have found like LSD to be very helpful, and there are so many prescription meds that like I've never even have had the desire to even try it. I've never even taken a Xanax. The night that I went into the hospital to, you know, I was inducing labor, and they were like, "Oh, do you want to take an Ambien to help you sleep?" And I was like, I've never taken an Ambien before, and what if I wake up in labor high on Ambien?
Ambien before your baby's born?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yes, and then when
I don't know anybody who has taken Ambien before the baby, no judgment, but to me that's insane.
For sure. I'm like, the thing that I don't understand too about like the epidurals and things is it's like, okay, so you're telling me that the most intense process and experience of my life, probably to this point. I mean, at least for me, I'm not speaking for every woman, but I'm like, that's the time that I'm going to experiment with drugs. Yeah, they wanted to give me fentanyl. Oh my. For my whatever. I said, no, I obviously don't want fentanyl, but like it was, you know, all these weird things happened. And I was like, why are they giving pregnant women fentanyl? Like this is like so backwards. It's very confusing. Yes. And then they're like, okay, but don't smoke weed while you're nursing because your kids will have ADHD. Yeah. I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. I love, you know, I really appreciate the medical profession in this country for how just all the brilliant things that these doctors have come up with. But there is something also really fucked up about the disconnect with especially pregnancy, which I think has now been treated as a medical emergency. Yes. You know, it's almost like instead of just a natural thing that's been going on since the beginning of time. But
because I was having twins, I couldn't do a home birth. It was considered a high risk. Yeah. You know, so I just brought the midwives with me. Yeah. Which was really great because then I didn't need the epidural because, you know, I trust my body. Yeah. I wish that more women did. Yeah. When did you get out of Indiana and how did you get out?
Right. Well, that's an interesting question. I remember thinking when I was a kid that I wanted to leave. But there was this attitude, not really from my family, but from my felt like kids I grew up with, that was impossible. Like you just can't leave. You can't go to California. Like get it out of your head, kid. You're never going to California. Like forget it. And I even remember this girl I was dating in high school, and I was like, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you want to live? And she's like, I don't want to live anywhere but here. Like I don't want to leave. And I was like, wow.
You were like, really?
I was like, I don't think this is going to work out. But when I graduated high school, my parents actually left the country and moved to Mexico. And then there I was, you know, just by myself. You know, my brother lived there, but that was it. You know, I had no connection. So I went to Mexico, followed my parents, went to school down there for a while, ended up moving to Minneapolis, which is not too different than the vibe in Indiana. You know, I love the Midwest and I love the people in the Midwest. There's no really judgment around it, but as a kind of a freak creative artist type person, it can be difficult to be in that environment, especially where I grew up, which was very kind of jock, kind of sorority sort of vibe. So I just one day just was like, I gotta get out of the Midwest. I packed up my van and just drove west. I'd heard of Ashland, Oregon. I'd never been there, never seen a picture of it. Just rolled into town. The little story that I thought was really cool was that I went to this coffee shop and was looking for a place to live, and I saw this tie-dye Post-it note that said, you know, trailer for rent. So I called the number, and this lady, Carolyn, answered, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I rented the room, but you can come stay with me till you find a place." I was just like, "What?" Like, you have no idea who I'm calling you on a payphone from a coffee shop, and you're telling me that I can come stay with you? I've never met anyone like this before. And she had, you know, walked into her trailer, she's full of crystals and just this like, you know, new age folk singer kind of woman. And it just took me in, you know, and it was really changed my mind, a life around like I just never met people like that before. And that was my introduction to the West Coast kind of woo-woo community,
Yep.
which I still have, 1 foot in. I sort of have 1 foot out of it too, but yeah, so that's how I ended up on the West Coast, and then ended up in California for a while, and now back in Oregon and Colorado, and so just kind of living everywhere now, but all West.
Yeah. How old were you then when you went there?
I left Minnesota probably when I was like 20, 21. Yeah.
And had you started making music already?
I had been working on, I was a wilderness guide and played kind of folk guitar, like more like Simon and Garfunkel, and I did some heavy metal stuff when I was in high school. I was in a heavy metal band for 5 years. I loved music, but I hadn't really given my life to it until I came. So here's another funny story: is that I was in Ashland and I met this girl at this coffee shop, and she totally I hadn't met really this girl like this before, and then she saw this homeless guy, and she's like, "I'm gonna buy that guy some flowers," and she went and bought this homeless guy some flowers. I here's some flowers. He's like, "Oh," and he started crying. He's like, "Thank you so much," and he said, "Take this," and he gave her a bag of mushrooms. And I had never done mushrooms before, so she came and she gave me half the mushrooms, and then never saw her again. And so I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do with these? And so I ended up driving out to the coast where the redwoods. I'd never seen redwoods before.
Wow.
Took these mushrooms for the first time. Saw redwoods for the first time. Saw banana slugs, melted into the root wad of a tree. Came out and had basically kind of like a quote unquote seen God for the first time. And then I realized at that moment that I needed to dedicate my life to music. Wow. And then came home and furiously wrote, dozens of songs and completely changed the way I wrote music. And I guess kind of going back to one of your first questions about writing for that's when my music became psychedelic. Before that, my music was just like folk music or rock music. I didn't really have an understanding of what there was more. And so that experience completely changed my direction. And I don't think I ever would have needed to do psychedelics ever again, and I'd still be on the same path that I'm on. I just needed that one window to open and to see the light for the first time. And it's like there's that saying I've heard, it's like the finger is for pointing out the moon, but once the moon is seen, the finger is no longer needed. And so once you see the light of that moon, you can never look away. So that was amazing.
So you did mushrooms for the first time by yourself in the redwoods for the first time.
Yeah. Looking at the Pacific Ocean, not for the first time seeing the Pacific Ocean, but first time not by myself at the ocean like that. And that
sounds incredible.
It was the best thing.
Was that the first time you had ever done any psychedelic? No.
Yes, I'd smoked weed before.
That's it, just weed.
Well, I take that back. I had taken peyote in Mexico.
Okay.
So I had taken, but that experience was more like goofy, silly, laughy. Wasn't like a shamanic journey by any means. We were just kind of, goofing around, and
that sounds kind of fun.
It was fun, but I didn't have that kind of, like I said, that sort of like cracking open, and didn't quite get to that point. It was more of an interesting, fun, silly experience. So I did have a little experience, but I had never taken psilocybin, and especially in that kind of a heroic dose kind of quantity. So that was the first time I'd experienced that, where it's just like the complete meltdown, and then rebirth, ego death, all that,
I mean, would you say that was kind of like the birth of Random Rab?
More or less.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the birth of the beginning. The birth of Random Rab happened a little bit later when I was collaborating with my friend Trippy Nick. And then that's when we took psychedelics more seriously, and shamanism and lucid dreaming and aliens, and really I dedicated my life to trying to understand all that at that point. And that's when I think it really kind of crystallized into how I was going to approach this through my music. Before that, it was sort of like I knew that there was I could see the path and just needed to go down it a little bit further to open that next door into where I am now. And then once that kind of reached that place where Random Rab began, I've been on the same path ever since. And I feel like that's been like the trajectory to where I am now, and just growing and honing in. And I can really relate to my earlier music after that point. And before that, like I don't relate to any of that music. And once I kind of went through that door, all that music to this day is sort of still, I can find a piece of it that means something to me.
Oh, yeah. That's wild. Man. So what do you think about aliens then?
Well, our first, Trippy Nick and I did an album called Never Trust an Alien. So the idea, we went to Chiloquin, Oregon and did some research because we heard that was an alien abduction kind of center where lots of people have been abducted by aliens. There's some movies written, I can't remember the name of the movie right now, that was shot in that area. But we interviewed people and asked them about alien abductions and that kind of thing, and had some funny stories that were pretty wild. But at the end of the day, I kind of, for a while I was like, maybe the Greys are real, or maybe, I'm revisited. And I realized that aliens and all that, it's more like different dimensional beings. I do believe that we're surrounded in life forms constantly. They're all around us. They're inside of us. I mean, we look inside your own body right now, and we have like mitochondria live in each one of our cells, and they have a different DNA than our human cells have, and the mitochondria are passed down from our mother. And who are we to know that our consciousness, that we think of who we are as a person, is not the mitochondria, and maybe all the other stuff is a completely different life form, and maybe there's two different life forms existing, and then all the bacteria, who knows, that maybe our gut bacteria is where our consciousness comes from, and it's not who we think we are. Or maybe we're an amalgamation. And so that's what I think aliens are, is just like life. We think of aliens as like, these beings that live in a flying saucer from another planet, but really like maybe it's just a gradient. Like life just goes out into the universe and everything's interconnected, and therefore we're an alien to ourselves. Just look to your left, there's an alien. We're surrounded in life, and we're so that's kind of where I've kind of come to the conclusion now. Like it's all just one big stew of life everywhere.
That makes absolutely perfect sense to me, because I mean, it's sort of like the spectrum of light. We can only see so much, and then maybe you take some mushrooms, or you take some LSD, or you take some DMT, and then you can see this thing that's always there, but you can't see it when you're in your like sober, conscious mind. But when you're in this other frame of mind, you can see it because there it is.
Well, I think it might be too, is that the other life forms can't really harm us. Therefore, through evolution, we've just learned to ignore them. And we're only focused on the things that can actually affect us, like the animals and this kind of physical reality that actually can interact with us. And so there's no need for all that extraneous information of being able to see all these other life forms, but that we don't interact with in such a daily basis. I mean, maybe they can affect us, but it's not the same as like this cat, the cat can scratch you, and it's like different, So maybe it's like what you're saying, these substances like DMT. I mean, if anyone who's taken DMT and hasn't seen aliens, I don't know what planet you're on. But
right. Yeah. And DMT is made within our own bodies. So I mean, it's like, there you have it.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a super fun time talking to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I would also just, I have an album coming out this shooting for a release date of Valentine's Day. So I'd like to plug that. So
sure.
Yeah. And then also Red Rocks May 11th. So those are two things I'd like to say. Hey, everybody, come to Red Rocks May 11th. And I also have an album coming out in February. So.